Welcome back to Brave Ideas, where we chat with the leaders in commercial real estate to answer all questions space as a service and help office real estate reposition to meet the evolving demand from the future of work. If you're an investor, fund manager, developer, landlord, operator, property manager, agent, or broker, hit that subscribe button. And if you prefer to watch or join our newsletter, head over to braveideas.media. I'm your host, Caleb Parker, and for this episode, hosted inside Mute's showroom in Clerkenwell, I'm joined by Heather Fleming, Head of Revenue for Spacemade, a UK-based co-working brand who's grown to nearly 20 sites in the last 6 years. You may remember Spacemade CEO Johnny Rosenblatt on this podcast a couple seasons ago. We'll put a link in the show notes to that episode if you missed it. Heather spent a decade in hotels at Ace Hotel and Ennismore with the Hoxton, where lobby culture turned footfall into community. Now she's applying those hospitality muscles to co-working and flex. Surprise and delight, names remembered, needs anticipated, and experiences that make people stay. Co-hosting with me for this episode is Eyal Lasker from FlexSpace AI. Together, we connect the dots between hospitality and dynamic pricing and how adoption of hotel best practices can lift flex performance. In this episode, you'll hear how lobby culture maps to day passes and meeting rooms as paid lead gen, how to treat on-demand as your top of funnel with the goal of negative CAC, that's customer acquisition cost, and how to tighten the loop between data, sales, and community so pricing and programming work in sync. We dig into practical dynamic pricing by product line, private offices, co-working, meeting rooms, and events. And we go on to talk about connecting websites, CRM, and occupancy data. And you're going to hear a powerful stat from on-demand bookings. This one cuts across many of the pillars of space as a service: hospitality, community, workplace design, space management, and brand. Now, before we kick off the show, I got to say that I'm a big fan of Eyal's company. So here's a quick 30 seconds on how FlexSpace AI helps our industry grow by adopting best practices from the hotel industry. If you're a flex operator still juggling spreadsheets and manual rate sheets, stop. You don't need to be a wizard to outsmart the big guys. You just need FlexSpace AI. It's your AI-powered revenue team that never sleeps, optimizing prices, automating marketing, and filling your space while you focus on your members. No burnout, no guesswork, no what-if tabs at 2 a.m. With FlexSpace AI, your building works as smart as you do. Now head over to flexspace.ai/brave and start growing your revenue today. Okay, without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Heather. Welcome to Brave Ideas, Heather.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's my first podcast, so I'm excited.
The first podcast of many.
Of many podcasts, yeah.
I'm telling you, you're going to be a star after this.
Here's open.
You are already a star according to Johnny Rosenblatt.
Oh, that's kind. Thank you.
We're in the Mute Clerkenwell showroom in one of the meeting pods here doing this podcast. And shout out to Mute and Gary. I'm excited to have this conversation because we have a special co-host today, Eyal Lasker, with us with FlexSpace.ai.
Yep.
And we are going to dive into your background in hospitality and bringing that best practice and what you've learned from the hospitality industry at Ace Hotel, Ennismore with Hoxton, and you were at Old Sessions House.
Yes.
Into all these best practices into the co-working industry. But before, I have to give a shout out to my business partner, Ian Miner. You guys, I think, overlapped in the Ennismore days.
Yeah.
Ian created the working from concept.
Yeah. Very timely as well.
Yeah.
It was that kind of first opening up of, I think, working from in the UK, especially. And it was so key. It was like the kind of evolution of the lobby co-working spaces that existed in Ace and Hoxton, and just taking it to that next level of, elevating it. So yeah, it was amazing. And I believe does very, very well.
Absolutely. So you started your career in hospitality. Let's talk about that for a moment. Why did you start a career in hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, I spent just over 10 years in specifically in the hotels and hospitality industry. And I have always loved travel, always loved hotels. For me, it was a natural progression. I worked for a kind of property design company before that called which uniquely was doing its own thing by building kind of great environments for people to live in that were beautifully designed and carefully thought out. And so hotels was a good jumping point from there. And I think it just teaches you, it gives you an incredible background in the art of hospitality and the art of kind of taking care of people. And so I joined Ace Hotel when they opened their first hotel in Shoreditch, which I don't know, if I know you do know a bit about it, but it did become a kind of like beacon of culture for that area. And they were, the main adopter in the US of that lobby culture. So it was anyone in the kind of local area, artists, entrepreneurs, singers, anyone who wanted to come and like work or use space, they could just come into the lobby, they could have a glass of water or a coffee and they could stay there all day, which they did. But then what that meant was that when you were traveling and you were coming into these hotels, you were like in this incredible, genuine ecosystem of the area that you were in. So I kind of cut my teeth there in events and sales and learned all things rooms and hospitality and absolutely loved it. There was a camaraderie, and I think there still is in the hospitality industry. It's a lot, it's 365 days a year, 7 days a week. You're always on. There are competing segments, there's F&B, there's rooms, there's events, there's, group bookings. There's a lot, a bit like Flex in a way. And then I went on to the Hoxton after that. So worked for Ennismore when they were, I was just saying, around the corner in Sessions House, Old Sessions House. And we were reimagining that ground floor as a kind of event/co-working space.
Heather, in your role at Ace and then on to Ennismore, you talked about all the different competing revenue lines, and in sales, where hospitality is very service driven in that lobby culture, how do you connect the service and the hospitality you're delivering to actual revenue lines?
You see everybody as having the potential to produce connections. And I think when let's say someone comes into the lobby and they get a coffee and you get that amount, it's not going to add a lot to the F&B revenue, but the word of mouth, or they might then have a project that they're working on where they need a meeting room. So suddenly they're in a meeting room, and then they might do something where they have people that they need to stay. And so then you've got people booking rooms. And so the ecosystem really develops from there that turns into kind of tangible revenue. And I think you try and take people through on the journey as an entry point, and then how can you grow them by the service and the culture that they come back for. One of the interesting things we had at Ace was a cultural engineer that was a physical role that existed, and their entire role was place setting, effectively, was finger on the pulse, the dog whistle that went out to all the different kind of creatives and cultural people that we wanted to get in the building. And that, in effect, that drove revenue by awareness and having the right people. And so I think it's always being mindful of, you can get entry connection points that can turn into much bigger revenue streams.
So Heather, then what drove you, or what made you go from hospitality into co-working?
Yeah, so needing a rest? No, I feel like, as I mentioned earlier, they're all consuming and I absolutely loved it. But I think when I got chatting to Johnny and started to see this whole other emerging industry that was Flex, and I'd had actually people that worked in my teams who'd gone in to work for labs or, had already made that hospitality crossover. But I was having very interesting conversations with Johnny about what hospitality meant for Flex and how you could apply it. And I just felt there was something really exciting in coming over into an industry where the hospitality element was being, it was a bit of a buzzword and people were talking about it, but how do you do it really effectively? And I felt like I could make a real difference with my background in terms of coming over to that side. And I've loved it. I really have. I think there's incredible parallels between both of them.
I want to pick up on the parallels here for a second. We're talking about the ecosystem and how, hotel guests and all the people coming into lobby culture start spending money in all these different places. Same thing happens in co-working. You get your members and your office customers that are booking meeting rooms and buying coffees, etc. So you create this ecosystem that drives all the revenue streams.
Yeah, I think for me, so much of the parallels are about the place setting. So in terms of making somebody feel welcome and like a sense of belonging, that, I think for all providers is genuinely how you will retain customers and how you will move forward, having their, piquing their attention. And I think in hospitality, we have a thing called in hotels, you have a thing called surprise and delight. And it means that you go out of your way to create a special moment for somebody. And, reception teams are like physically targeted on some of this. It's done from a great place, but they are, there's almost like quotas that you need to meet to make people feel really special. And I think it's those little things that you do. Yes, the events are important, and, everyone has a kind of cultural program and breakfast that they do and to bring things in, but it's how you get those people to interact with you as the community teams and the sales team and with each other. A really nice example actually from one of our sites is we had a Greek member and one of our community team who work at that location, and she went to Greece and she went on holiday and she brought back some worry beads, and he hadn't seen these or kind of had like touched these since he was a kid. And you could see he was so flawed by that personal, that personal touch that she'd done, but she'd remembered it from conversation. So I think being interested is so key, hiring people that are interested in people genuinely, is so key.
I agree. When I was in hotels, the GM of the hotel I used to work for, this is like a million years ago, but he used to always say, exceed expectations. Don't just smile at people. Don't just greet them friendly. Exceed their expectations. Give them more than what they're expecting.
Yeah.
And I think in the office world, traditional office world, well, I don't want to beat up on them too much, but that hospitality has been lacking.
Yeah.
And to be able to bring that in, how do you do that? You have to hire beyond a tick box. I was talking to Emily Lashmore in our episode previously, and she talked about looking for that in the DNA of the personality of the person you're hiring. Recruit for that kind of personality.
And recruit from different backgrounds. I think what makes Spacemade personally so interesting place to work is that there's a diversity of background. And I know Simone, our head of community, she does, and Jose, head of people, great. They are actively looking for kind of the right people, and they've really got the DNA and the essence of that down. But it comes down to being interested, to wanting to make a difference. I think in hotels, you get taught that from a very active services in there. It's how you interact with people and exceed and go above and beyond and surprise them and make them feel incredibly special when they're there. And that can Flex only benefits from that, because no one's really staying for the fact you get free bagels on a Thursday. Let's be honest, they're staying because of the way they feel when they're in there. And the people are the greatest asset to that. People and data, because data's obviously, you need a lot of that, but the people really are so key to all of this.
I want to bring up something here. James Panapinto, he's been publishing the series on Brave Ideas called the Co-working Confidential series. It's saying the parts unknown out loud.
Oh, God.
And the one that came out today, he talks about co-working being dead. And he says, because everybody's calling it co-working now, but it's not really co-working.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said, a zombie industry staggering around borrowed clothes, community events that feel like purgatory for sins committed in a past life, NPS scores, bride with cheap pizza in a communal kitchen. And it's so much the opposite of what you're describing.
It's an evolution, I think, that needs to come from it. Is like everybody does the cultural aspect of things. Now everyone does the events, and it's like, well, how do you make them more personal? You do that through getting to know your members. You listen to what they tell you they want. You highlight their side hustles. You do all the things that bring a community together. You connect people. We have an amazing project called Hale House that's genuinely been, I've loved working on it. It's a partnership with Howard Walden and Harley Street Health District. And it's a health tech innovator hub that we've opened there. And it's never been so key in terms of getting that ecosystem right, because the value proposition above, if you've got two prices next to each other, the value proposition that you're going to get with Hale House is that you get access to people, connections, tailored events, an event series that's genuinely interesting, genuinely connects people, investors, innovators, brings people together. And so I think that, it's the value in that's key.
Well, this episode is going to be a crossover between practical dynamic pricing, AI, and revenue management, and hospitality, which is fitting, I think, because your background in hotels, bringing these best practices over. I think the hospitality, making people feel taken care of and feel like they belong, exceeding expectations, knowing their name, but knowing what they care about. This Greek customer you're talking about.
Yeah, I know.
It's amazing. It's amazing. But I do want to jump into some of the revenue management stuff, because in hotels, they've got it down to a science.
They do.
They've had it down to a science for years and years and years. I remember when I was working front desk at a hotel, we'd have a lot of people out there on the weekends for walk-ins, not just reservations,
Yeah.
And the person checking in, number one in line, would get a different price as the person checking in number 10 in line, in the same, like within 30 minutes of each other, because the GM would pop around and say, nope, move the right stuff.
Or you'd wait until late in the evening. We used to have people who would go out for dinner and then check in afterwards because they knew they'd get a better rate.
Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we would even oversell sometimes because we knew some people wouldn't even show up.
Yeah.
We still charge their credit cards. But anyhow, how have you brought these best practices into Spacemade?
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm looking at our revenue streams kind of coming out, I think flexibility is key. Obviously, in hotels, like you mentioned, dynamic pricing is built into the DNA of every hotel that you open. You know, you've got your bottom and your ceiling, you've got buckets, you all know what you're working with. I was of the era where you would be queuing outside the head of revenue's door, kind of waiting to see the best rate you could get for a group stay. And so it was always so fluid. And so with Flex, it's not quite there yet, which obviously we've kind of touched on. And I think what you're bringing to the table is incredible in that sense. But it's actually I'm more manually flexible, I'd say, at the moment. I use the data to determine decisions that we make based on pricing. It's easier to do for things like meeting rooms and events based on need periods, where you are against budget in the month, you know, having that flexibility. And in terms of co-working and dedicated desks, it's the same thing. It's knowing what we need to get to, but being able to be flexible with the mix of how we end up there. So I'm kind of constantly with our COO always reviewing where we're at month by month now, really kind of where we're at, where we need to be, what we could do, what the outcomes we need to get to where we need to go, and then relaying that to the sales team. These are the mixes that you could do to get to where we need to be.
And what are the responses that you get from your customers to this varying prices?
I think it's very deal dependent. I mean, especially for private offices, which make up kind of 80% of our revenue, they are fixed to a point. But we will try to be flexible where possible, as every provider does. I think also for us, when budgets are written, you could be 2 years out from opening. So you, with the landlord, are always reevaluating where you're at because the market's changed, or the competition's changed, or things are affecting that. So I think there's flexibility where we can, and then there's some things that you can't be flexible on.
With dynamic pricing at hotels, and then, as we migrate that to Flex as well, what are the incremental revenue gain that you can get as a business from price changes?
I think the way I could describe it is that it gets you to an occupancy number or a revenue number quicker, that you have to constantly be reevaluating, like, if you're reducing on this, then you need to push this. So it's kind of looking at it all kind of holistically. And then that's how I would explain it. Because I don't think we have a model yet, or Spacemade personally, where it's an exact science and that you can put a percentage on it, it's more that underneath you have to be flexible to get you to the higher revenue quicker. Does that make sense?
Well, you're looking at it holistically, because the way I understand dynamic pricing is you make sure that the right customer gets the right price at the right time. And sometimes you use it as a tool to increase occupancy, and sometimes you use a tool to increase yield or increase price. And so if you're increasing occupancy and getting extra revenue you normally wouldn't have gotten when it's slow, but increasing price over here, overall, I guess you're increasing your monthly EBITDA, so to speak, or at least top line.
Yeah, and you're always looking at ways to kind of, maximize which kind of revenue stream is performing better. So if you've got more traction on kind of co-working and dedicated desks, then you're going to kind of push that as much as you can, knowing that there's more interest, the same way you would surge things if hotels, you could see that everybody was looking at a certain date. It's like, where are we at the moment? What is performing well? Is the private office market a little bit slower? Do we need to be a bit more considerate there? Meeting rooms and events, if you're in the month, then why wouldn't you reduce pricing to get people in the door? Because you've got to hit that end number. So I think that's how we, at the moment, again, quite manual in a sense, is just having to constantly stay on how we flex that.
Well, the key word you just said was manual. And I can imagine that it's quite time intensive to look at all the data and then feed that back to your sales team. There's a feedback loop that needs to take place. And then how are customers responding? And maybe this varies from product to product, from membership sales to offices to meeting rooms and day passes. Do you have a different strategy for each one? How time intensive is that? And why is it so manual?
We've recently launched kind of lots of event venues this year. So we already had a couple, but we're now up to, we're launching our 5th next month. So suddenly events, that focus, that revenue stream has been a real focus. And I think they are labor intensive sometimes because of programs and systems, if I'm honest. So we're working through how to bring our RM up to scratch in terms of from a sales perspective. So the data we have is clean and it's good, and we know where we are. But I think it's connecting the revenue streams. So moving from the events to meeting rooms to day passes to there's no one completely clear identification of all of those yet. We have it when we put it together ourselves, but in terms of systems, it kind of needs to be found. So that's why I would say it's a little bit manual at the moment.
And is that different than your experience in hotels?
I think in hotels, there are more complex systems already that exist with that revenue management, dynamic pricing. It's not something that is industry standard yet in Flex, I would say. Whereas in hotel, you live by it. So it's having those systems up to scratch. We've also started using AI a lot more in terms of taking on some of our sales workload. And then it's like how that communicates, how we're getting that data. I think the manual aspect comes from just trying to make sure you've captured every user journey, every missed opportunity, every marketing opportunity, every set of sales opportunity, because there's so much that exists in terms of data that can tell you what you need to know.
I'm going to put you on a spot, Al, for a second, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So FlexSpace.ai, you've got the e-commerce functionality, really cool UI, UX, gets people booking meeting rooms, inquiring for office space, booking office space, day passes. But underneath the hood, you've got the AI piece that looks at all the data and makes real-time decisions. So what you've just heard here from a manual perspective, what could that improve? What could FlexSpace help improve in the manual processes here?
Yeah, so the first thing is just connecting the dots. So we have when you think about the typical co-working operator, there is the backend system, there's the CRM, there's the website, right? And these three main components used to or traditionally have been segregated, or we're not really talking to one another. So with FlexSpace, this is kind of the first thing that we did, was really connecting different data points into one coherent system that can reliably understand the pipeline, but also understand occupancy, right? And start connecting the dots and build these models where you can start predicting to the future how the space will behave and how different price points can really impact those metrics that you mentioned, like occupancy.
And I can imagine it also really tracks the journey and on spend of a person once they reach you, is, tracking all their touch points of how they're using you, and you almost getting an overview of that person's potential from a revenue perspective.
So that's a very good point, right? The lifetime value, right? And this journey, if we go back to the hospitality, right? This person that came into the lobby just to and just order $5 coffee, right? How do we take this journey into a full-blown member that is taking a private office over time? What are the touch points? How many times they need to be at the space, interact with the team? So that's definitely a key component. Another thing that we do at FlexSpace beyond the pricing is really optimizing those engagement points, right? Through AI automated retargeting and engagement to nurture a one-time day pass user all the way to a co-working member or a private office member. Really depends on if it's a freelancer or a company.
Yeah,
that sort. Yes,
and I think that kind of insight is so invaluable to obviously sales, but also community, because then they can see what their members are doing, how they can continue to kind of use them and work that lead for as long as possible. And the retention thing is huge for every provider, but the human connection comes into that quite strongly. Obviously that keeps them engaged, but then this real insight into how they're used and their potential can only increase things better.
Yeah, so back to connecting the dots, right? So another way to look at on-demand users, right? Which, in the past were kind of like a second-class citizen for most operators, and really the focus was on the members. But, right, if we again take this hospitality approach of activating lobbies, so essentially your lobby becomes your top of funnel, right? And your lead gen. So I often say that you invest so much in marketing spend and events and all this heavy cost ways to acquire potential leads. where if you just open your website and your space for people to interact, get a day pass, book a meeting room, this is essentially your now best paid. And when you think about the unit economics, right, the best source of leads that you can expect. So instead of acquiring someone to come and book your space, they're actually paying you to come and use this.
Yeah.
That's actually an interesting point. You talk about CAC, customer acquisition costs. Can you imagine having a negative CAC?
Yeah.
That'd be that's really cool. I think your point, Heather, about the community team understanding, because you talked about the Greek customer,
Yeah.
and your team knew what's important to them culturally and what they appreciate, but also knowing their coffee order or knowing how many times they might come in and book a meeting room on certain days and being able to get ahead of that
Yeah.
and exceed expectations. So they've already have something booked for them, or they've got the right coffee order already. It
Yeah.
makes it more personal by understanding the data from that aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as I said earlier, that the systems are all there and we're using them and we're getting the data we need, but there's always so much room for improvement. And that one-stop view of everything is so useful for community teams to really understand what their users are doing and almost kind of think ahead. We talk a lot about how to anticipate the needs of people, and that is hospitality in a nutshell, is knowing you want something before you need it. Things like you're celebrating a company milestone, where are you doing your event? It's a company away day, where are you doing, come and do it in our meeting rooms or use our spaces to do that. And also kind of knowing that personal information for sure.
Are you tracking your customers who are booking meeting rooms that might not have a membership or an office? Are you tracking how often they come in to be able to say, actually, we should probably recommend they get a bigger membership now?
Yeah, definitely. We do. We track everything that kind of all the entry points into the business. And then we also track very closely kind of, if you have groups of co-working memberships, okay, and then how is it time to talk to them about taking a smaller office? If we have availability, is it that you can temporarily house someone and say, test it out for a bit? You guys are together all the time. Why don't you just try working in an office for a couple of days a week? And so kind of always being aware of that, of who's using which parts. The meeting rooms are kind of key to that entry level point of coming into us. And it's something we're working on at the moment, is like really placing a lot of experience on that, because that experience of, okay, great, I had an amazing meeting, that was a great interaction, I love the space, that will only lead to something else. Even if it's just repeated meeting room usage, it's one less person to go out and find to come in. So we work a lot on that.
Absolutely. And I want to ask a similar question, but in sort of reverse. Are you tracking the sort of the negative actions, meaning somebody inquired and didn't book, someone inquired or toured and didn't close a deal, and what do you do with that data that you have negative actions?
So we do, it's all kind of captured, if I guess from a marketing sense as well, if something kind of doesn't go ahead, and then which kind of bucket does it go into behind the scenes, and how do we retarget them sensitively as well? Because I think there's a lot of, if we've ever signed up for a newsletter or something and then suddenly you're already turned off, well, I know personally, turned off by the product because you're like, I just don't need any more emails from you. So we do it quite sensitively, and the sales team do regularly reach out to try and reconvert those at a later date, but we always leave it a nice kind of, obviously once you've got over the initial, do you want to come and try? Sometimes you don't get any answers, obviously, but you always try and nurture that lead then, but then it's coming back to a later date. And it's something we're working on at the moment with marketing, is the retargeting piece as well.
And with the retargeting, is there a certain pricing strategy you put around that?
So when we retarget, we have a couple of discount strategies that we use.
Yeah, so interesting point on that. So when we analyze our data, what we've seen from on-demand bookings is that there is a price elasticity there, coefficient of 3, if that says anything to anyone. But just to explain that, essentially it means that for every 1% of discount, you get 3% increase in booking volume. So that's not to say that you need to drive your price to 0, but there is a local maximum that you can inspire when you do those retargeting activities to find the really ideal price point per product that will lead to the highest booking volume and therefore the highest revenue that you can get from the asset.
That's a really amazing insight.
Yeah, and that's back to your point about data, right? The more we can collect and analyze data, that's where these pockets of truly insightful user behavior
Mm.
are starting to pop up, and that's how we are able to help program better experiences, if you will, through a vast array of data that helps us understand what really kind of moves the needle for people in the industry.
And I think also takes out the guesswork, because the less guesswork you do, if you have the data to prove it, you know where to put your efforts and you know where to hone people in on those great experiences and human connection and all the stuff that is so important. But you need to know what the right places are to do that.
Heather, I appreciate you mentioned guesswork. One of the things I wanted to leave people with in the audience listening today is some tangible, practical takeaways. And so I'd be curious, like, considering that, some of this is guesswork, testing and trialing, are there any areas that you've tested in that actually didn't work, and what were they, and how did you pivot from that?
Yeah, I think rather than something that hasn't gone right, is more kind of as a challenge, and a good one, and one I've really enjoyed kind of working on, is we have opened a number of kind of industry specific hubs. So I mentioned Hale House, which is our health tech innovator. We have a kind of creative one with Studio Y in West. And I think what's really interesting, especially with Hale House, was you are representing and building a brand and a space for an industry that is not my industry. So I'm not a health tech professional and I don't really, know much about it. I do now, but in the beginning I didn't. And I think the one thing I've really learned on how to do that is to completely absorb yourself in that industry, because most industries are welcome. They just want you, you're interested, they're interested. So, we were doing things like going out to big health tech conferences in Amsterdam before we opened. We didn't have any tangible product at that point. We didn't even have a brand, but we had the ability to just meet the people we were going to represent and build this thing for, and listen to the sessions and the speakers and understand what drives them and how, they want to be connected, what's missing. So all of that, and be really curious. It's the main thing. Curiosity, ask questions, human connection. It's all about understanding people. And if you're not curious and you don't ask questions, you're never really going to find out what you need to.
I love that. One of the people that really inspires me in our industry is Kat Johnson over in the States. She's the community guru in co-working and Flex. And there's a quote that she often posts on LinkedIn: to curate a community, you have to be part of that community. And I think you just described that to a T.
Yeah, and I think it's true. It's about showing up at events. It's about understanding what people take away from it and where they come from. With Hale House, the event series is key because it gets people in who are based in, Oxford and Cambridge. They want to come in and they want to kind of see what's happening and attend these events, and it's been a real driver. But again, you need to understand the context. You need to be visible and part of that. And I think something Spacemade does well is, you'll find all of our leadership team in all of our sites. We are there on the ground and, with the members as much as possible. Community teams, sales teams, it's very fluid. We want to know everybody.
The future of office looks like the hotel industry, and it sounds like it is the hotel industry now. That is the future. I'm on board. And hospitality, mixed use, taking care of people, making them feel like they belong. Heather, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care of yourself. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe at braveideas.media. And I'm actively sourcing buildings for a brand-led hospitality repositioning. If you have a lead, an owner considering a sale, or a partner brief, DM me or reach us at bravecorp.co. And until next time, take care of yourself.